Imagine spending 2 months crawling through raw sewage, breathing in fumes, and carving through solid rock with nothing but hand tools, all to steal millions of dollars from one of the most secure banks in France. Now imagine actually pulling it off, walking away with the money, and then when the police finally catch you, making your escape by leaping out of a courthouse window onto a waiting motorbike. This is not a movie plot. This actually happened in Nice, France in 1976. But here is the part that nobody talks about. The heist itself was nearly perfect. It was human ego, a loose tongue, and a little bit of bad luck that brought the whole thing crashing down. And even then, the mastermind still got away, twice. This is the true story of Albert Spaghieri and the heist of the century. Just a quick note, this video is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not a guide or endorsement of any illegal activity. Always respect the law. To understand this heist, you have to understand the man who planned it. Albert Spaghieri was not your typical bank robber. He was not some street thug looking for a quick payday. He was a former paratrooper who had served in some of the most brutal conflicts of the 20th century, Indochina and Algeria. These were not ordinary military tours. These were brutal, dirty wars that forged men who could endure extreme conditions and think like soldiers. Spaghieri had seen things that would break most people. He had survived combat, lived through ambushes, and learned how to operate behind enemy lines. After leaving the military, he drifted. At some point, he worked as an assassin for the OAS, a French underground organization that wanted France to retain control of Algeria. This was a man who had already crossed lines most people would never even approach. Eventually, he settled in Nice and opened up a camera shop. Quiet life, a normal life, but something was missing. He later wrote in his memoirs that he felt like a dog waiting for someone to throw him a bone. He said he was sick of sitting up and begging. He hated the feeling of licking his master's hand. And then one day, the idea hit him with tidal force, a plan so audacious, so risky, and so outrageous that nobody would ever believe it could work. Spaghieri was not just a criminal. He was a philosopher of crime. He believed that stealing, properly done, was a noble profession. He saw himself as an artist, and the bank was his canvas. This was not about greed. It was about defiance. It was about proving that the system could be beaten. Here is where things get truly fascinating. Spaghieri started by asking a very simple question. How do you rob a bank without ever going through the front door? The answer, he realized, lay underneath the city. Nice, like many old European cities, had a sprawling network of underground sewers and tunnels, dark, cramped, and absolutely foul. But to Spaghieri, that maze of pipes was the perfect entry point. He studied the city's infrastructure. He looked at blueprints. He walked the streets above and mapped out exactly where the bank vault was located. And then he looked at what was beneath it. His plan was insane. Dig a tunnel from the sewers directly into the bank's vault. Nobody would ever expect it. Security systems were focused on the front door, on alarms on walls. They were not focused on what was coming from below. Spaghieri knew he could not do this alone. He began assembling a team. Now, this is where the heist gets even more interesting. He did not recruit random criminals. He put together a crew of about 20 men, and they were a mix of two very different types of people. First, he brought in his former comrades from the military, the surviving ones at least. These were men he had fought alongside in Indochina and Algeria. They were disciplined. They understood secrecy. They knew how to endure hellish conditions. They were not career criminals. They were soldiers, adventurers, and survivalists. Second, he brought in the professionals, the real gangsters from Marseille who had the technical skills. These were specialists in safe cracking, welding, and breaking through reinforced concrete. They had the tools and the know-how to get through the physical barriers. Together, this unlikely team had everything they needed: military discipline, criminal expertise, and a leader with a vision. For 2 months, the team worked underground, drilling through rock and concrete with hand tools. Think about that for a moment. This was not a modern construction project with heavy machinery. This was men with hammers, chisels, and drills, working in total darkness, breathing in the stench of raw sewage, crawling through water and filth. Spaghieri described it later as spending weeks spitting up scum, trembling with cold and horror down there among the bloodworms, maggots, rats, and viruses. The tunnel had to be precise. If they went off course by even a few feet, they could end up beneath the wrong building or collapse the street above them. They had to shore up the walls to prevent cave-ins. They had to hide the excavated dirt and debris so nobody would notice. Every night, they would crawl down into the sewers, work for hours, and then crawl back out, covered in filth, and go back to their normal lives as if nothing had happened. And yet, somehow, they kept it a secret. Nobody reported them. Nobody noticed the strange activity. The people of Nice walked above them every day, completely unaware that a small army of men was tunneling beneath their feet. Before they committed to the final plan, Spaghieri did something that shows just how bold and how confident he really was. He actually broke into the bank during a test run. He wanted to check if the alarms would trigger. He discovered something shocking. The vault had virtually no security inside. The bank relied entirely on the front door and the walls. They had essentially left the back door wide open. The execution was timed around a holiday weekend, when the bank would be closed for several days. This gave the crew a massive window of opportunity. On July 16, 1976, they broke through the final layer of concrete from the tunnel into the vault floor. And then, for the next 30 hours, they had the run of the place. This was not a smash-and-grab operation. They were methodical. They cooked meals. They drank wine. They took their time. One of the gang members even acted as an appraiser, sorting through safety deposit boxes to determine what was most valuable: gold, jewelry, gems, and cash. They forced open 317 safety deposit boxes. They cleaned out the bank's own vaults as well. In total, they walked away with approximately 50 million francs. The exact value is debated. Some sources put it at $8 to 10 million US dollars, others at 16 million US dollars, and still others at the equivalent of 26 million euro today. Whatever the figure, it was the largest bank heist in French history at the time. But here is the detail that makes this story unforgettable. They did not just leave. They welded the vault door shut from the inside. Think about that for a moment. The bank employees arrived for work on Tuesday morning, inserted their keys into the massive door, and it would not budge. They called in locksmiths. They called in engineers. They called in security experts. For days, nobody could get inside. And all the while, Spaghieri and his crew were long gone, living it up. When the vault door was finally cut open, the bank realized the truth. They had been robbed blind. But by then, the trail had gone cold. Spaghieri left a note behind. It read, "Without guns, without violence, without hate." That was his signature. He wanted the world to know that the heist had been a work of art, not a crime of desperation. So, if the heist was so flawless, how did they get caught? This is the part that proves that the biggest threat to any secret operation is not the police. It is the people you trust. The investigation was a nightmare for French authorities. The thieves had left no fingerprints and no usable DNA. They had been meticulous. But the police did not give up. They followed leads, interviewed witnesses, and eventually traced the gang to a villa that had been rented and used for planning. The police raided the villa. They found equipment, tools, and evidence of the planning. But more importantly, they arrested two of the accomplices. And here is the thing, these men cracked almost immediately. Under pressure, they gave up Spaghieri's name. They told the police everything. It was a classic weak link in the chain. Spaghieri had trusted the wrong people, and those people folded under pressure. When the police realized that Spaghieri was the mastermind, they also realized that he was not going to go quietly. He had already fled the country. He traveled to the United States. He went to Guatemala. And according to some reports, he even found himself in a conversation with a CIA agent and proudly admitted his role in the robbery. He was not a man who liked to hide. He loved the story as much as the money. But eventually, he made a mistake. He returned to France. He believed that enough time had passed, that the authorities had moved on. He was wrong. He was arrested at a cafe in Nice. It seemed like the story was finally over. Spaghieri was brought to trial in 1977. For weeks, he played the part of a quiet, compliant suspect. He showed up on time. He answered questions politely. He lulled everyone into a false sense of security. The judges and the guards started to relax. They thought they had him. But Spaghieri was playing a longer game. He had been planning his escape from the moment he was arrested. He was just waiting for the right moment. That moment came on March 10th, 1977. During a meeting with a judge, Spaghieri asked to look out the window for some fresh air. The judge agreed. In a single fluid motion, Spaghieri climbed onto the ledge and jumped. It was an 8-meter drop to the street below, roughly 2 stories. He landed on a parked car, denting the roof. Then he ran to a waiting motorcycle, driven by an accomplice, and they sped off before anyone could react. The judge and the lawyers stood at the window in shock, watching as Spaghieri disappeared into the streets of Nice. But here is the part that nobody expected. Days later, an envelope arrived at the offices of the Nice Matin newspaper. Inside was a sum of money sent by Spaghieri himself. It was to compensate the owner of the car he had damaged during his escape. And here is the irony. The owner of the car was on sick leave at the time because he had fallen from scaffolding. Spaghieri was not just a thief. He was a showman. He had style. Spaghieri fled France and made his way to South America. He was convicted in absentia and sentenced to life in prison. But it did not matter. He was never going back. He reportedly had plastic surgery on his face to avoid recognition. He settled on a ranch in Argentina, which he claimed to have purchased with the proceeds from the robbery. He lived there comfortably for years. He even wrote a book about his exploits, published in 1979, titled Frick Frack, The Great Riviera Bank Robbery. The loot was never recovered. Spaghieri took the location of the money to his grave. He lived a free man until his mysterious death in 1989. He made international headlines one last time, but even his death was surrounded by mystery. To this day, there are questions about exactly how he died and where the money is. But the story does not end there. For decades, French police were baffled by the case. They had Spaghieri as the mastermind, but was he really the only one? Then, in 2010, something strange happened. An anonymous book was published about the heist. The police investigated the author and discovered that it was none other than Jacques Cassandre, a notorious Marseille mafioso. Cassandre had accidentally revealed himself as the likely true mastermind of the heist 40 years after the crime. Suddenly, the whole story shifted. Had Spaghieri been a front man for organized crime? Had he been taking orders from Cassandre all along? The police had to rethink everything. Cassandre was put on trial for the 1976 heist. The investigation that had gone cold for 40 years suddenly came roaring back to life. Cassandra was eventually convicted and sentenced to prison. The 1976 heist remains one of the most extraordinary robberies in history, not just because of how it was done, but because of how long the secrets remained hidden. So what do we take away from this story? It is easy to romanticize the heist itself, the planning, the daring, the execution. But the real lesson is about human nature. The plan did not fail. The execution was nearly perfect. What broke the operation was trust. Spaghieri trusted the wrong people, and those people folded under pressure. And ultimately, his own ego played a part too. He could have stayed quiet and lived out his days in obscurity, but he could not resist the thrill of the story. The irony is that we are still telling this story nearly 50 years later. The money is long gone, but the legend survived. And sometimes the legend is worth more than the cash. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most incredible heists, let me know in the comments. What would you have done differently if you were in his shoes? Do not forget to like and subscribe for more stories that prove truth is stranger than fiction. See you in the next one.